Welcome to Surviving Society. Hello everyone. For the next few weeks, we are collaborating with the Dig Where You Stand team. We are in Sheffield today to kick off this series with Alex, Désirée and Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining us, team.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I cannot believe this is my first time in Sheffield. What an incredible city. I have spent time in the north. I grew up in the Midlands, and I can't believe the Sheffield, just call it the Sheffield, has passed me by. This is such an incredible city, and being in this exhibition, which is looking at the racial history of Sheffield, is incredibly humbling and inspiring. And again, I am ashamed because I can't believe I've not been here, and I know very little about the history of this city, and it is so rich. And I guess that's kind of where the Dig Where You Stand outline project comes from, is this rich history. Is that right, Désirée?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sheffield is, even though I'm not a natural born Sheffielder myself, in fact, all three of us are immigrants from elsewhere, aren't we? Where I came up to do my degree and then never left because I can't afford London. But it's a beautiful city to bring up kids in because I've got two boys here. But it's also refreshing to think about Sheffield in a completely different way that you might not get that same if you were brought up in the place, because home feels different, doesn't it, to a found home, which is what this is for me and maybe for the three of us, I think.
Yeah, definitely for me as well.
I would say so, over time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, over time.
What is Dig Where You Stand? What is this? Why are we here?
So, Dig Where You Stand, first of all, it's from the book and the ideas by Swedish writer Sven Lindqvist. We love him. And I didn't get to meet him. He passed in 2018, which is a bit of a shame. But Sven Lindqvist thought about Dig Where You Stand, and for him, he was relating to a workers' movement. And that year was, we think it was just after the Second World War, wasn't it, Cheryl?
Well, the book came out in the 70s, but yeah, he was encouraging workers to investigate their own histories and their own organisations and who was running them, so giving the power to the workers rather than those who were running the factories.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he felt that concrete workers in China had more in common with concrete workers in Bangladesh than they did have with their bosses, and he encouraged workers to come together in a way like follow the money, an early form of follow the money, to create movements of solidarities. So that was one of the ideas. That's one of the methodologies that we thought was really important. Another one is thinking about critical fabulation, which is Sargent Hartman. I'm sure some of your listeners know about Sargent Hartman. We love Sargent Hartman. And critical fabulation, which is an interpretation of the archives and thinking about it in terms of narrative, not just facts and figures, even though we love facts and figures, Cheryl.
Sometimes we do have to have facts and figures. We always have facts. Everything is rooted in evidence. But it's just a different way of sort of handling that evidence.
Exactly, and reinterpreting the information. So putting those two ideas together, Dig Where You Stand, was an idea that Cheryl and I thought about. I was commissioned to be a writer in residence at the Sheffield Archives in 2021, and they still yet to get rid of me, even though I'm not supposed to be there, but I'm always there.
You will never leave.
Just stick me like a pop-up bed in the strong room. So I was commissioned in 2021, and having gone into the archives, at first I thought, who's in here? What am I going to find? I'm not quite sure. And it actually started off as a Zoom conversation in the wake of George Floyd murder. Loads of organisations suddenly did the performative black square thing and suddenly wanted to talk about race when they hadn't done for decades previously. And on this Zoom call, the head of the archives here is a guy called Pete Evans, lovely guy. I was talking, I don't know why they even invited me on the Zoom call. Anyway, we were talking, and I then suddenly said, I think the archives need a write-in residence. And Pete went, bet, all right then, come. And I was like, okay, now I've got to do something, because my mouth just ran away with me, as it always does. And now I've got to prove, now I've got to do, I've got to do some work. So I was commissioned by the University of Sheffield to initially, University of Sheffield and Sheffield Archives put money in to think about the archives. It was really a 6-month project, which has now grown and grown. And Diggory Stand is here because initially the archives going, all right, come on then. The university going, all right, come on then. And then me going, what can I do? And we have been together ever since. No one is getting rid of anybody now. What I realised when I got into the archives, when I first got there, is that it needed more than me. I'm sounding a bit boring now because I think these two have heard me chat so often over the last few years. But I believe in collective action. I believe that one person doing something is not enough. I don't like projects, because it's a short-term solution. Well, it's not a solution at all, is it? It's a short-term little like Band-Aid over something that needs far more investigation and research and heart. And I think that's what Degree Stand has, investigation, research and heart. And we then Alex approached me after that. Well, we hadn't even finished the first iteration of the Degree Stand, where we had a few posters in a couple of public locations. And before that even, Alex messaged me when Alex from the University of Sheffield Equity and Inclusion Department, was it at the time?
No, it was before those days. I can't remember. I think I was a lowly PhD student. But researching race, higher education and the arts. I knew of Désirée's work for years. Désirée did a seminar for me actually at some point or other at undergrad, and was increasingly trying to get involved in community-based projects that took race and racial justice seriously. Saw Degree Stand and thought that is exactly what Sheffield needs. This investigation of heritage but through the arts felt really important, and so I think I approached Désirée and said, how can I help? And actually took on more of a project management role within it, because that's more what I've moved into now, is project managing these sort of racial justice-based, if we're not calling them projects, movements, whatever it might be.
Yes.
Groundings is, maybe we'll use that from now on, groundings.
Yes.
With the view to try and help keep them sustainable, really, and provide sort of that logistical infrastructure. And so when we collaborated from that point on, it was about how do we blow this up and make it bigger, and not only city-wide, but regional-wide, and national, really, ultimately.
International.
When I've been going around the exhibition, and you'll hear this in episodes to come, listeners, I have just been thinking this needs an international audience. Some of these films, some of this audio, these need to be in prizes. These should be getting awards. This is a serious collection of art. It's incredible.
I think it's probably worth saying as well, given the reference to Sven Lindqvist and Sadie Hartman, what we're specifically focused on in terms of the people inside the archives. So obviously when Désirée started, you were looking more at black working class people, not only in Sheffield but South Yorkshire, over hundreds of years, trying to combat this narrative that modern migration started in the 50s and that's pretty much when people of colour entered into Britain. Actually, there's a much longer history than that, and that's what Désirée was discovering constantly in that residency. We wanted to take that further and delve into all the different types of communities that have come from across the world for various different reasons and ended up in South Yorkshire for some reason, particularly emphasising working class people, particularly emphasising women of colour as well, because they have not received much interest at all. But ultimately, about kind of bringing these stories out and showcasing them to a region that itself perhaps doesn't know about these histories, and therefore have a false impression of kind of how the contemporary South Yorkshire came to be. But equally, I think on that national level, Sheffield gets missed out when we talk about racial histories. You know, even outside of London, there may be some other cities that we know a bit more about, but Sheffield, not very much at all. And so it was about kind of bringing Sheffield into that national conversation about migration, diaspora, and empire as well, because those are the causes for why we came to be here. So I think that's worth saying as well.
Cheryl, what brought you, or how were you brought in to Dig Where You Stand?
Okay, so after that initial chat that Désirée and Pete had, Désirée came over to the archives. At that point, Pete had said, "Over to you, Cheryl." I'm one of the archivists at the Sheffield Archives, so it's my job to collect and list the records that we've got and have a good understanding of all the material that we have there, which goes back over 800 years. So Désirée got into that first conversation about what we wanted to achieve, what I thought we did have in the archives and how we could use that. And I think up until that point, you know, we've known about lots of stories of people of colour, and the best way we've been able to sort of like bring them together is just in these sort of printed study guides which we put on our website, and we're never quite sure how visible they are. So for example, we have a study guide on the Somali community in Sheffield, drawn together all of the sources that we know of, and it's a work in progress, all of these kind of like study guides are, but we never really felt that they're perhaps not the right format for people. They're just a list, it's a starting point for researchers, but it's our way of saying we've got material, please come and use it. And I think then when Désirée arrived, I could obviously show her these guides, and also another working document that I had where we were finding more stories, and it was a case of look at all these stories, but we don't know what to do with them. We're essentially archivists, and we're certainly not artists. We don't know how to elevate them, and that's where Désirée sort of came in and said, I know exactly what we can do with these stories.
And they've been hanging on by their coattails ever since, because it's important to engage in these stories in that way. And as Alex has said, that it's located outside of London, and as Cheryl has just said, that there is so much in there. This exhibition is but the tip of the iceberg, really, and we could keep going, and we do want to spread this movement across cities. We do want to, we're talking to people in Manchester, people in Leeds, people in London, and so those things, that progress is in the works. Of course, also always dependent on funding and capacity, but it is something that this is just the beginning of, and we're not quite sure where it's going, and that makes it quite exciting, but we know that it's a movement and not a project.
I think it's also important to emphasise how much of a driving force Désirée is to this project. You know, Désirée tells the story in quite a modest way, where she says, in this Zoom call, I mentioned the need for a residency. At that time, you know, to be talking to institutions who we know have shown no interest in race at any point, to kind of show them themselves and, you know, make those points and then deliver. That's quite something in those early days. And Dig Where You Stand in 2021 was ultimately Désirée in the archive with Cheryl finding those stories. There was no sense of it having a platform beyond that, but without that spark that Désirée has lit, you know, we wouldn't be sat here doing a podcast. So, and Désirée is a legend in Sheffield. Like, people, if they don't know, they need to get to know.
Can I just say, Désirée's a legend in London as well.
You know.
I'm going to see Désirée in Sheffield. Are you?
An essential. I'm going to use the word figurehead, though. Désirée is adamant that she's not a figurehead. But the truth of the matter is that Dig Where You Stand is only here because Désirée's propelled it to this point, brought people on board because for her, she, as she said, sees the value of having sort of a collaborative force around it. But that role is essential, and we don't really know where it's going, but it's a very values-driven project because that's come from Désirée. You know, this isn't about any one individual who's part of Dig Where You Stand. It's absolutely about that socialist movement of getting working class stories, for us, working class stories about people of colour, into community, which is why with the exhibition itself, we're actually exhibiting in multiple spaces in the city centre, in the market, in the library, in the cathedral, in places that everyday people go all the time. Maybe people that don't want to go to an art gallery, people that perhaps feel excluded from heritage sites previously. We want to immerse people in this heritage and in this artwork so that they can get to know this really important information about their region. And that's all types of people, but with the view that we're shifting the narrative around South Yorkshire, but also that we're hopefully, particularly with people of colour, giving them a sense of claim over that region, to know that actually we use this line a lot, you are deeply embedded in the region's foundations, which means that whatever it is now, you have shaped in some way. And there's no sense of whether that's positive or negative. It's just the fact that you were here and you had an impact. And we talk about this all the time. We're not trying to create this uber national story of you know, we're all British and we're all in this together and this really unified arc almost. We're in fact quite against that, really. It's not about those unified stories. It's just about we are here, and the nuance and the grittiness and the complexity that makes up a city and a region. People of colour were part of that, and working class people were part of that, just living their everyday lives, making those contributions. So that comes from Désirée. That's the values that Désirée's driven.
Can I just say, it's so inspiring being here, listening to you all, and like, yeah, Désirée, you are a leader, and like, movements need leaders, like we know that, but as you also say, movements also need the collective. And one thing that really stands out to me with the movement of Dig Where You Stand, and this is something that we have strived for in Surviving Society, and I don't think we've always got it right, but we're still trying to work towards it, but is the importance of the kind of the administration of this work. Because like, I'm an ideas person, yeah. I'm not the best at organised administration, although I think some people might question me on that. You need people like Cheryl and Alex. Like so I met Alex before I met you, Désirée, and I was like, wow, you're part of the groups of people, like internationally, locally, like historically, who keep us sustainable, help keep us sustainable. And like, so often we hear about our movements that fall apart because we're not able to keep things, the pressures of life, of structures, of interpersonal life, all these other things. Like, organising is important. Like,
yeah. And without Alex, we wouldn't be here either. Without Cheryl, we wouldn't be here either. So what I'm doing is I'm recognizing my shortcomings, and that's cool, because we all have shortcomings. I know that I cannot do a spreadsheet to save my life, and I don't like them. I've got no intention of interacting with them whatsoever. Alex, on the other hand, love a spreadsheet and will send me this thing and go, look at what we're doing. And I'm like, okay, fine. I feel like I know what I'm doing now. And it's because of his calm, committed, just quiet fire is how I would describe Alex, as how much he's committed to the work, and how much he's committed to the message, and also with Cheryl. So we feel quite, I mean, you know, we don't want to, like, you come back in 3 years and we all hate each other, but we feel quite strongly that we've you know, like, it's a recipe, isn't it? You have to kind of, you add things, you take things away, and you hopefully do things in as ethical a manner as possible, and you put things back in and you shape it together. We talk to each other all the time, we question each other all the time. What are you here for? What are you doing? And we're each other's accountability, and that's really important. And being honest about what you can't do. I know I can't do that. My facts and figures are awful. I will sometimes look at Cheryl and she's like, really? What did you just say that for? she's right, facts are important, and this work is rooted in facts, and that's the point, really, is that we were here, as Alex is saying, we were here, we've been here for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and the more that we look, it's the more that we find. So this is the whole tip of the iceberg thing. But going back to what is it that makes allyships work? What is it that makes movements work? And I think it's a horrible, boring thing to say, but it is trial and error. And we have, all three of us, been doing this work in different ways in our different spheres, and maybe not got that bit right, and maybe you had to rethink that bit. But the power of recognizing what you can't do really, really helps.
Beautifully said, Désirée. It takes a village, a team for a movement.
Yeah.
This has also been the most organic movement that I've been part of as well, in the way that I'm saying it's values driven, it's also relationships driven too. Everyone involved has connected on a values level, but on a kind of a familiar level at this point. You know, like, it is a sort of a dig where you stand family as much as it is a movement. But I think that has been crucial, because I think it's those that you're that close to, that you're able to disagree with, hold each other to account. And in doing so, I think we've kept the steer of Dig Where You Stand strong. It's really well marshalled, well guided. And that goes for other collaborators as well. You know, it's not just the three of us. There are several organisations, individuals that keep Dig Where You Stand on its path. But because they're all built from our connections, from having done this work for a long time, as Désirée says, in different pockets, we've all come together under the Dig Where You Stand umbrella, inspired by, you know, Désirée's leading vision, to take it forward. But because we have those relationships in place and we can hold each other to account and have those difficult conversations, I think that's a massive part of the success. And I think going forward, it's something that we're striving to maintain. So we're always wanting to introduce new people to Dig Where You Stand, but it's about having that sit down, forming those connections, and then going from there. I think that's where institutions get it massively wrong. It's so reactive, it's so formulaic in the approach, and it just feels really extractive ultimately, because the motivation doesn't seem to be about wanting to connect with this thing to enhance it. It's coming from a place of like, well, what do I sort of get from it? And even if there are some kind of better motivations, taking the time to build a connection that can take years before then launching into the thing, it just doesn't happen very often. But Dig Where You Stand, you know, started roughly 2021, we're now 2024. Those 3 years has been as much about building relationships as it has been about doing anything in an archive. And that's as important, I think.
Yeah, it's important. And we were just talking about institutions today, weren't we?
We were. What were we saying about institutions? How much can we say? Yeah, I mean, basically along the same lines as what you were just saying, Alex. And we get this quite a lot, and it's something that we talk about quite a lot. And make a collective decision as to how we're going to respond, but to be approached quite often by institutions who perhaps just want to piggyback off this project movement, and want to benefit from the content of it and the responses people are having to it. And that's not okay if you haven't kind of done the work. We spent a lot of time thinking about this, a lot of time, a lot of evenings chatting about it, a lot of weekends chatting about it, and so many hours in the archive. We've been there late at night, haven't we? Poring over account books and parish registers, just looking for that thing that we know is there. And I don't particularly want an institution to come along and pick that up without having sat with the information themselves. They haven't lived it. So, and we have to challenge that quite a lot. This has been an eye-opener for me, actually, being directly challenged like this. And it's not okay, and it can get wearing, can't it?
Yeah, it's very tiring. We do end up having to educate people along the way quite often. And I don't think that's specific to the North either, because I did do a curation at the Black Cultural Archives last year. And I think it's the same there. Just institutions kind of struggle, and just fighting off the extraction can be a full-time job. Just in terms of language even, how do you approach somebody? Like, you know, I'm a writer, language is important, and how do we describe what's in the archives, and then how do we share that language? And in fact, that we have to have a shared language in order to look at the archives in the first place. So Dig Where You Stand is also about creating language.
Team. Dig Where You Stand, team. DYS. Thank you so much. Listeners, we'll be back again next week for more from Dig Where You Stand.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe. To host or produce a series of Surviving Society,
get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.